It's reminded that it's been suggested that every story is our story, and that every character, archetype and symbol in every story is an aspect of our own psyche. There's rather a complex story that continues our exploration into what it means to be human. It's the story of a princess who in fact loved to hunt. One day she was out in the forest chasing a deer when she grew tired and the deer had disappeared. So she stopped to rest under a tree, but as she sat, she heard a crackling sound, and she saw smoke rising up, and she realized that there was a forest fire. So she climbed the tree, and she had a view of the flames. She had a view of the animals, the birds fluttering in disarray, in fear, trying to escape the smoke and the flames of the burning trees. But as she looked, she saw a little family of birds, and they were huddled over newborn chicks, trying to save them from the smoke and the flames. But as the flames grew closer, the male bird flew off to safety, leaving the females with her wings trying to guard and save the tiny little hatchlings. But they were consumed by the flames. The princess, in her perch on the tree, thought to herself, "Ah, the males, just taking care of themselves, selfish creatures, all tarred with the same brush, so to speak. I will never have anything to do with males. I will not marry." So eventually she was frowned by those who were in her little entourage, and she went back to the palace, but quietly she was adamant. And when her father, the Raja, called suitors for her to choose, she refused, deciding and stating that she would not marry. And so it was. The Raja was very sad, because he was looking, of course, to have an heir to the throne. But the princess stood her ground, and not telling why, she remained silent about what had happened, but adamant that she would not choose a suitor, a male. But it so happened that an artist, a wandering artist of some renown, came by, and being made known to the Raja, he was employed to adorn the walls of the palace with his artwork. And he did so. But one day the artist espied the princess, who was in fact very beautiful, and he convinced the Raja and the princess herself to allow her to sit for a portrait. And so the artist created the artwork, a picture of this beautiful maiden. But instead of leaving it amongst the artworks that adorned the walls of the Raja's palace, he took this piece of artwork with him when he left to travel, to move afield, as was his bent. But some time later he found himself in a far-reaching kingdom, and there he also was known to the monarch of that realm, and he showed that monarch the portrait of the princess, and immediately it was purchased to place on the walls of this monarch's palace. But as it happened, the prince, the son of this monarch, had been out hunting when the purchase was made. But when he came back and espied this picture on the wall of his father's palace, he immediately fell in love. He longed for the being who was depicted in this portrait, but no one knew who she was or where she came from. But the prince pined for her. He languished, he longed for this beauty seemingly unattainable. He became taciturn and angry and depressed. But one day, the old minister of that realm tried to placate the prince, tried to bring him out of his deep state of melancholy. But the prince became very angry, and with the powers that were invested in him, he ordered that the old advisor be killed for his rudeness. Now everyone was saddened. The old advisor was much admired and respected by all, particularly the monarch. But when the minister went home and the family saw his sadness, one of his daughters, the youngest, it was told, saw him in this state of melancholy and gleaned from him that he'd been set to be killed because of what he had done. But the prince, who had said that he was to be punished for his rudeness, was placated by the monarch himself, who said, "Please, won't you give him just a little time to settle his affairs?" So the prince conceded a little and gave the minister time. But in that time, the daughter of the minister, who herself was an accomplished artist, found out what it was that was troubling the prince. And so she made a plan. She copied the portrait that was on the wall and made a very great likeness of princess that had been portrayed. And then she went to the prince and she said, "I will find your princess. Allow my father to go free, and I promise that I will not return until I find this one that you love so dearly." And so the prince conceded and allowed the minister return to his duties. Now, the daughter of the minister, dressed herself in the garb of a male, and taking her copy portrait with her, she travelled from place to place, seeking to find who it was and where she came from. Nowhere that she visited knew of this beauty, until at last she came to a far-flung place. And there, when the portrait was shown, everyone knew that it was a princess of the realm. Now how the young woman in disguise would be able to take and have the presence of this princess. So she set up a little shop where she sold her wares, her artist's wares. And people came, and soon it came to the ears of the Raja, and he called her in disguise to the palace, and having seen her artworks, immediately employed her to adorn the walls of the abode that he was building for his daughter, the princess. And so the maiden began. She painted the walls of this edifice, and every wall depicted a story. In her interactions while she was doing this work, she was able to befriend those who served the princess, and eventually to find out the story that had been given in confidence to one of the maids as to why the princess would not marry. And so our young maiden, on one of the walls of this edifice, decided to paint a story. But instead of being a story of the princess and her experience, she reversed the roles. She made the story of a prince who had seen this scene. So of course, when our princess came through her new abode, examining and asking about the stories on every wall, and came to the wall where there was the story, her story, but of a male, she asked the artist, "What is this story?" And the maiden explained that this was a prince of her very own realm, and it was his story. And the princess said, "But it's my story, and could it be that I've been wrong? Could it be that this experience that has colored my life is not what it seemed?" "I have to ponder on this," said the princess. But the young artist told the remainder of the story about her prince, and how he languished, and how he was sad because he too had vowed not to marry. princess said, perhaps if you tell him my story, it might change his mind. And so, of course, having fulfilled what it was that she had set out to do, she returned to her own realm, presented herself to the prince, stating that she had found his beloved. Immediately arrangements were made, and indeed we know the end of this story. The prince, with much pomp and ceremony, made his way to the kingdom and met the princess. The love had already been established, one through a portrait and the other on the wall of her house. They married, of course, and had many sons. In our exploration of what it means to be human, and recognizing in this story maybe something that we ourselves have experienced that colored our life. But how does this story bring illumination for us that indeed whatever it was that was set for us by that experience has gone? What is it about this story? Its characters, each one a representation of ourself. What does it tell us? What does it speak to us? What does it evoke for us?